fetch the water, fetch the firewood, prepare the fields for sowing, sow the seed, and harvest. And in most situations, she does this single-handedly. And at the end of her exhausting day, she's the last to eat the leftovers of her prepared meals. In my country, the typical African woman is physically and psychologically abused. In times of war, she is raped, and she personifies the downtrodden human being. Now, while all this is happening to her, she asks you, where are you, my father, when my education is sacrificed? Where are you, my brother, when I toil in the field and in the kitchen? Where are you, my mother, when my genitals are cut from my body with a sharp knife? Where are you, my sister? Where are you, my aunt? It is your hands, your strength that pins me down. In times of war, when I am gang raped, sometimes by 5, 6, 10 men, where are you, my father, when I'm violated? Where are you, my God? Where are you, my fellow human beings? Why do you allow this to happen to me? Now,
there we go. Thank you.
because I'm not a typical woman, I want to share with you today the spiritual journey that has been. I was born in a very small village called Weza, in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. It is the kind of place where you are born there, you will die there, you will amount to absolutely nothing. But I was blessed to have two amazing parents who realized that if they educated their kids, we would get out of poverty. From the age of 6, my mother taught me how to use my hands. She taught me how to knit, how to sew, how to crochet, how to fabric paint. And I went to private school in Rhodesia when African children received a substandard education. And we would make crafts and go to all the white neighborhoods to sell. My mother is the most amazing salesperson you will ever meet. I wrote a chapter in my book called Selling Snow to the Eskimos because she can sell you anything. She is the most amazing woman, and I would travel with her. She was a nurse. When we came back from London, my father could not get a white-collar job in Rhodesia because he was black. So my dad had to work in a chicken slaughtering factory until Zimbabwe got independence in 1980. So for them to survive, they survived on my mother's salary as a nurse. And they had 5 kids, so we had to work. We had to make crafts, and we had to sell. Weekends, we would be going to all the white neighborhoods selling our wares. And it gave me this tenacity to bounce back whenever I'm in a sales environment, to connect with people and create instant rapport with people right from the beginning. And it's a life skill that I've carried. Every single country I've lived in, I've succeeded. And it's not because I had anything special. The special magic I have is in being able to relate to other people and to connect. So I ended up leaving school at the age of 17. My father had lost his job, and the bank was about to repossess our house. And what my dad used to do, which gave me confidence as a speaker, is during school holidays from the age of 16, he would force me to go to the city and apply for jobs. And I had to go for interviews, but not take the jobs, because the corporate world was white. And he said, you have to be confident. You have to stand up in front of white people and speak. And that's how I gained my confidence, because our worlds were black and white, and we didn't mix with Europeans. So every holiday, I would go to the city, apply for all these jobs, and that school holiday, I had 4 job offers. I could have been a nurse, I could have been an air traffic controller, an air hostess, or a COBOL programmer. And my dad sat me down and eliminated the jobs he didn't think I was good at. Nursing, I'm a very squeamish person. I wouldn't have done very well in nursing. air traffic control, I applied for the job because I wanted to be a pilot. But I was so short, there was a height restriction to be a pilot. You had to be 1.7 meters tall. And I was like 1.48 centimeters, so I couldn't be a pilot, but I wanted to be in a job that had anything to do with travel. The air hostess job, my father said, an air hostess is a waitress in a moving hotel. You will be bored. Yes, you'll see the world, but it's not the same thing. And he said, there's this thing called computers, and this is in 1986. He says, that is the future. I don't care what you do, go and be a COBOL programmer. So that's what I did. I quit school at the age of 17, became a COBOL programmer, and joined the IT field right in the beginning. I'm now a dinosaur. There's very few COBOL programmers in the world. But it opened up the world for me. I hated programming, though. I hated sitting behind a desk coding. My boss recognized my skill was speaking, and he trained me up, and I became a systems analyst. And I went into systems analysis and design instead. And that's what I did for 14 years before I came to New Zealand. When I did come to New Zealand, I keep telling people that the wind blew me here because I wasn't coming to New Zealand. It was at a time when Zimbabwean politics was at its worst, the year that our president started killing all the white farmers in Zimbabwe. It was 1999. And we started researching other countries we could immigrate to. We had moved from South Africa back to Zimbabwe at the worst time. Our economy collapsed. Zimbabwe's inflation hit 516 trillion%. That is 516 and 24 zeros. And what that means is we hit hyperinflation. If you walked into a supermarket at 8 o'clock in the morning to buy a loaf of bread and you came back 10 minutes later, it would have gone up by 200 to 300%. So prices were escalating by the hour. And what it did is that there were food shortages. There was no petrol. For us to get enough fuel to fill up our car to get to the airport, we had to queue for 2 weeks. And you'd get to the petrol station at 5 o'clock in the morning and wait in a queue the whole day and get 5 liters and come back the next day and do that again tomorrow. Basic food commodities like sugar, salt, rice could not be found in our shop shelves. So I had gone to America. So in another life, I am a batik artist. I hand paint fabric. And I traveled to America at the National Black Hearts Festival. It took me all the way from Detroit, all the way down to New Orleans on the Greyhound bus. In one bag, I had fabric, a sewing machine, paint, and I went from city to city selling my wares, and I did really well in America because African Americans love my fabric. I started making clothing, cushions, and it was just fantastic. So I realized that I could make more money by teaching people to do what I do, which was the painting. So I approached community colleges, and I created a workshop, which was a 4-hour workshop. I would charge $50 per head and insist on 50 people in a class. I went through New York and signed up 15 workshops before I went back to Africa, and I thought, America's the land of milk and honey, that's where I'll make my fortune. But when we were traveling to go to America, I raised enough money for me and the children. And the idea was I would go ahead, try and find a job, then send for my husband. We sold our house, our car, our furniture, everything. And I was stopped in transit in South Africa. We flew from Harare through Johannesburg. It was just a 3-hour stopover. And when we went to check in, they discovered an error on my daughter's visa. The US Embassy misprinted the passport number on my daughter's visa sticker. Small typo. Instead of a 1 and a 2, they printed 2 and 1. They told us we had to go back to Zimbabwe. I went back to the US Embassy, who apologized and said, look, we're really sorry. We had to change our rules 2 days ago, and I had applied for these visas 6 months prior to this. And the new rule was I had to go back to them with a bank statement with $6 million to prove that I had money in the bank. We didn't have that kind of money. I went back to the airline to get a refund on my tickets. They were cheap Apex tickets. They said, you can't get a refund. We literally lost our entire life savings. But I'll tell you one thing, that was the biggest blessing that ever happened, because if I had got on that plane, I would not be speaking to you today. Because the building where I was going to work to run the workshops was near the Trade Center. This was 2 weeks before September 11th. When I look back, I know I was supposed to come to New Zealand because I was spending 2 weeks in New York to run these workshops. My end destination was New Orleans. I paid a deposit on a house that had disappeared with Katrina 2 years later. And I ended up in New Zealand because of my misspelled name. Now, you might have noticed that my name is misspelled. My name is Getrude Matshe, not Gertrude. I had a cousin who says she was on the Hotmail address book, just randomly looking at people's names. She wrote me this one-line email saying, "Is this Getrude? Are you Barton's wife? You've got to come to New Zealand." I wrote back to her and I told her what had happened. I said, "We have no money." She said to me, "Getrude, if you have faith, find the money. Come to New Zealand, you won't regret it." So as an act of faith, we sold the last asset we had. When we were students in South Africa, we bought a house in Cape Town. So we sold the house. I got to Wellington on the 1st of November 2001. And from the day I landed in this country, my life has been magical. Absolutely magical. My cousin was a single mom, and she told me not to bring the children because she had 4 teenage kids of her own. She lived in a small house. She said, "Come alone, try and find a job, then send for the children." But I left Zimbabwe because of HIV and AIDS. And the year that I left, our medicine men started spreading a rumor that if you rape a virgin, it cures AIDS. So the incidence of child abuse went up in Southern Africa. My kids were 3, 8, and 10. I used to pray for a safe country to bring up my kids. My prayer was answered. They're now 26, 24, and 18. And I've never had to worry about their personal safety, about what might happen to them. I remember thinking, I want to live long enough to be a grandmother. I'm 46. The life expectancy of a Zimbabwean female today is 35 for a female, 37 if you're male. HIV and AIDS has ravished our communities. We have households run by children who are aged 5, 6, 8, who are on the streets hustling to survive, and they have siblings that they look after. If I took you to our village, you will see abandoned homesteads where everybody is dead. It's like a war, but there is no war. My youngest brother died of AIDS in 2009. And it got so up close and personal for me because I got involved in this project when I was 17. World Health came to our village in a helicopter. It was an AIDS program, and they were trying to conscientize people and bring an awareness of what the virus is about. And I was sitting on my grandmother's veranda, and I watched these flyers coming out of this helicopter, and the parents running and catching the papers, and the next thing they're lighting their fires. And the children are blowing up the condoms and running around with these balloons. And it was the most ineffective campaign. They wanted to educate people, but half of the people in our village were illiterate. So I wrote a proposal to World Health when I was 17 to write a play with an AIDS theme because we passed our knowledge through our stories. My grandmother was the most amazing storyteller you will ever meet. I grew up in a village with no electricity, no running water, but she could hold you in the palm of her hand with her stories. And I wrote this play. I was funded for 2 years, and we would perform this play. It was called Just for Women Theatre. And my mission was to reach that rural Zimbabwean woman who hasn't gone to school and educate her about HIV and AIDS. It was a fascinating process because when you're not educated, just understanding what is a virus is a very difficult concept. I remember I would run a workshop after we performed in the play, so people got the story
and the morals and the lessons through watching the play, but we had to further explain things. And people would ask me questions like, so what is this thing called a virus? It's something you can't see, it's something you can't touch. So I came up with a way to explain what a virus is by buying a box of apples at the beginning of the week, and I'd let them decompose. When I ran the workshop, I'd pull up a box of rotten apples and a box of healthy apples and say, this is what a virus does. This rotten apple is a human being. Something has gone inside its body. It's eating away from the inside. It's going to decompose and it will die. And at that time, you could see the face of AIDS. You could see people with thinning hair, losing weight, the lesions on their faces. The face of AIDS was very clear 20 years ago. And that's what I did. We went into rural communities where there was no access to information. And really, I wanted to empower women. And women would ask me, but Getrude, I've been sleeping with my husband for the last 30 years, and now you're telling me if I sleep with him without a condom, he's going to kill me. Very difficult for a lot of women to even insist for a husband to wear a condom. Polygamy is an accepted norm in Southern Africa, so your husband can have multiple partners, and you don't have a say. Some men have got 2, 3, 5 wives. The virus is spreading through our cultural practices. You know, in Zimbabwe we have a practice called wife inheritance. And what it is, it was a way to protect the widow if her husband died. So if my husband died, my husband's brother could inherit me and the children. So somebody would feed me, somebody would look after my kids and send them to school. And what ends up happening is you become the second wife. So what has happened in Southern Africa is that the virus is wiping out families where the brothers take on the same wife and she kills all of them. And this is why we have homesteads where everybody's dead. In Malawi, there's a practice called, it's a ritual cleansing. When your husband dies, the widow is forced to sleep with a local medicine man. If she refuses to do that, she is ostracized by the whole community. So again, the virus keeps spreading. There's so many elements and factors that keep compounding the spread of HIV. And I believe that education is the key. And this is why I created the Africa Life Education Foundation. Because they've proved in Uganda that if you can take a child from grade 1 to grade 7, just 7 years of education, 1, you can read and write, you can get a job. 2, you don't have to depend on a man, because marriage for most African women is a source of survival. So it's about educating the kids, and in Uganda, they've actually slowed down the spread of AIDS because people can read. 7 years of education, and this is what my project is about. It's about primary school going kids, just getting them from grade 1 to grade 7. My whole ambition and wish is to build a secondary school and a university eventually, if I can scale my project. So when I got here, my first job was as a systems analyst. I worked in Lower Hutt in Wellington. I did that for 1 year. It was very hard because when my husband came to New Zealand 3 months after I arrived, he couldn't get work in New Zealand because he's a doctor. And the Medical Council of New Zealand took a year to give him accreditation to practice in this country. So he went to Australia. He went to Mount Isa. When he got to Queensland, he called me and said, Getrude, stay where you are. They had put him in this Aboriginal outpost in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't even a road to this place. They had to fly him in. So I stayed in Wellington, and he commuted and came home once a month. So for the first year of my stay in New Zealand, I was here alone with 3 kids under the age of 12, and I was losing it. I had a full-time job. And the day I decided to approach my boss, I wanted to renegotiate my working hours so I could work from home in the afternoon, go to the office in the morning. And I approached him on a bad day because he was in a very bad mood that day. He stood in his office and said, Getrude, you don't have a choice. It's either you stay or you go. I'd been promoted to project management level after 3 months. And I was responsible for computerizing the largest private hospital in New Zealand called Wakefield Hospital in Wellington. I was invoicing $25,000 a month for my services to this hospital. My annual salary was $60,000 per annum. So you know how you walk into your boss's office with a bit of confidence, thinking I'm of value to this company? He didn't give me a choice. And I remember standing in his office and thinking, he is forcing me to choose between my children and work, and my kids are not negotiable. And I remembered a quote that I had read in a book that morning that said, if a man kicks you on the butt, did it push you towards your goalpost? You know how you think of these crazy quotes? I'm thinking, why am I thinking this? And I realized that that was what I needed. That was the kick in the butt that I needed. So I quit my job. I resigned on the spot, went home and told my poor husband who was still job hunting that I quit my job. And I went back to my art. I started painting my fabric. And I went all over Wellington trying to sell my fabric. The fabric would not sell. I normally paint 3 meters pieces of material. Then one night I had this crazy dream. I dreamt of my grandmother. She's my spiritual guide. And she came to me in this dream and gave me the best advice that I apply to everything I do in business now. She said to me, Getrude, if you have a problem, break it up into small pieces. At 2 a.m., that dream made no sense. But when I woke up, I realized what the dream meant. And I got my scissors. And I started cutting the fabric into small pieces. And I'll show you what I created. And I started making cushions. I made 1,000 cushions and sold 1,000 cushions in 3 months at $25 a piece, and started my first business in New Zealand. It was a small shop that sold these hand-painted cushions. I ran this business for 1 year, but got really bored because people didn't come into the shop. I lived in Kandala. If you know, Wellington is a very conservative neighborhood. My colors were too bright, and I started exporting using a website and exporting the products to the United States. But sitting in the shop for a year was the biggest blessing because I got bored and I started researching other things I could do in business. And I hit on my first $1 million idea. I realized that when my husband was job hunting that there was a need for health professionals in New Zealand. So I wrote back to Africa to all our friends and said, look, I want to open a recruiting agency for doctors. Would you like to come to New Zealand? 5 of my husband's friends said yes. I placed 5 doctors and made $125,000 in 3 months, sitting in my bedroom slippers at home. And that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years. I bring in doctors into New Zealand and Australia. So that's been a really fascinating business. The next business I created was in the filming of the movie King Kong. Now, as a storyteller, I started stalking Peter Jackson. They would give presentations and talks all over Wellington on how they made Lord of the Rings. And I would go to every presentation that was given. And one day I went to a presentation, I was sitting in the audience and thinking, gosh, I wouldn't mind acting in one of Peter Jackson's films. So I asked the question, how could I take part in the next film? And they were casting people for King Kong. So I auditioned for that, got 2 parts to act in the movie and felt really special. But when I went in for my wardrobe fitting, I was asking the casting director why I had 2 roles, and they said, well, we actually don't have enough African extras. We need 350 people to take part in one scene. And I thought, shoot, this is a business. So I said to them, if I come up with 350 people, can I present it to you as a business case? They said, sure, come on Tuesday. So I met him on a Thursday, had my audition on Friday, had a weekend to run around Wellington with a digital camera hitting on anyone brown. I stopped Maori people, Indian people, and I created a database with over 450 people, ethnic background. And they had to spray paint us one color so we looked like a tribe. It was the most amazing thing I ever did. I took part in King Kong. I was so inspired in the making of the film. I created a casting agency for people of color for film and advertising. I actually have the largest database in the whole of Australasia. I started working with the refugee community because a lot of refugees come to New Zealand. They don't speak English. They don't have, skills that they can transfer. But you can work just by being you. I started working with the Women's Refuge group, showing women who were frustrated and had little kids how they could make an income from home. And I'd run workshops to teach people how to do this. But the filming of King Kong inspired me so much. I quit my day job, got a managing director to run my companies, and I went back to school. I went to Avalon Studios in Wellington to do a course in TV and film production with a vision that I will be the first African person to write, direct, and produce an Oscar award-winning screenplay. And I wrote this down 10 years ago, the back of my book. I was given a vision 2 weeks before the book was published of everything I would achieve in this lifetime. The back of my book is my obituary, so if you read the book, you have to read the last chapter first. And it doesn't make sense because a lot of people who read the book 10 years ago thought I was absolutely crazy. But I held on to that vision. The vision was me winning 8 Oscars for this movie script that I was writing. And when I published the book, my husband said to me, Getrude, people will think you're a little bit cuckoo, you're a little bit crazy. And I said, it doesn't matter. That's my vision, that's my dream. And for the last 10 years, I have written and rewritten a script that is now going into production this year. The backdrop to my story is HIV and AIDS. I've always been frustrated when I watch films about Africa because they're not told from our eyes. You know, Hollywood will take our stories and manipulate them, and I'm always frustrated. And experiencing working with Peter Jackson for 3 weeks, I ended up taking part in Avatar as well. I'm in Avatar. Every film that's made in Wellington, I find myself in it. I realized that we change the world through stories. This is why I'm so passionate about writing books. When somebody watches an interesting film or a movie or they read a book, it is life-changing. So I've been working on this script and struggling with it for a number of reasons. That was the Christmas show that inspired me to write the first book. This was Oprah when she went to South Africa in 2004. She was standing on this soccer pitch full of children. She had 50,000 orphan children. And I self-published my first book as a way to raise money so I could pay for children's school fees back in Zimbabwe. The book is $35. It only costs $5 a month to send a child to school. But I come from the second poorest country in the world. The average Zimbabwean lives on 30 US cents a month. So kids don't get to go to school. Our population is 14 million. 1.1 million of Zimbabwe's population are AIDS orphans. So I created this foundation, and these are some of my kids. And every time I look at their pictures, I keep thinking, what if this project could produce the little future Nelson Mandela? What if the scientist who find a cure for AIDS is in one of these kids? So I fundraise for my kids. And it's hard sometimes. I have 580 children that I sponsor. And I'm trying to reach 1.1 million. So I wrote the script, I rewrote it, and I kept thinking, it's not finished, it's not perfect. And I know why now, because I had been telling the story from the outside until my own brother died of AIDS in 2009. He died 30 days after his 30th birthday, but he gave me a gift because he allowed me to watch him die. I spent 2 weeks with him before he passed. And in those 2 weeks, I realized that AIDS is a story that we have thought. Everything is a story. And we can change our stories if we want. So in Africa, AIDS is like cancer. When you talk to somebody who survived cancer, and you try and find out how they managed to push through those barriers, it's their mindset. In Zimbabwe, you hear that somebody's HIV positive, 3 months later they're dead. Your uncle is HIV positive, 6 months later they're dead. It's now part of our belief system here. So the biggest thing we need to address in Southern Africa is the mindset. It's in people's way of thinking. So what I've done with the movie that I'm writing, I am weaving a healing. It's going to be the first spiritually healing film ever made. There'll be people who will walk into this movie theater and just be entertained and walk away being entertained. There'll be somebody who's been told they have cancer, they have 6 months to live, and they will change their minds around that disease. So the music score has got a healing property to it. It's been very difficult to embed all these messages in the script, but I'm almost there. And I've now attracted Hollywood producers who want to fund the film. The mayor of Wellington has been my biggest fan. When Kerry Pendergast was in office,
she heard about my work, I could literally walk into the mayor's office and call her up and say, can I come and have a cup of tea? And I would hang out with the mayor. And one day she called me and said to me, Getrude, what can I do to help you? And I said, you know what, Kerry? I am struggling. I need a mentor. I need a coach. I need somebody to help me work on this movie script. So she gave my book to Peter Jackson and to Fran Welsh, his wife, who wrote all of the scripts for Lord of the Rings and King Kong. And Fran Welsh and her business partner, Philip Moyers, are now my mentors. And they're helping me perfect my movie script. Now, if 10 years ago, when I first said I am the first African person to write, direct, and produce an Oscar award-winning screenplay, I had no idea how I was going to do it. What I did know was I was going to do it. And I held on to this vision for 10 years. And today people ask me, Getrude, how did you become an independent filmmaker? And I have to tell people, I just decided I wanted to be it, and I became it. And this is why I love sharing my story, because you can do anything you want in life. You've got to have the conviction. You've got to have the passion. You've got to know that you have all the abilities to do anything you want in life. And nobody can take that away from you. So I'm on this magical journey right now, where I'm going into production of the making of my film. And it should come out in 2017. Right now I'm trying to raise $1 million to make the trailer for the film. And I'm creating the film very similar to how they made the movie District 9. Anybody ever watch District 9?
Yep.
So District 9 is about apartheid, you know that, right? It's a science fiction film filmed in South Africa. It was low budget, it cost about $10 million to make, but it made $55 million on the box office on day one. It was because of the marketing campaign that they had around the film. So I've been studying films that have succeeded and how they succeeded. And I'm going down the same route. So, Ubuntu, it got really challenging for me to support the children in my foundation because of the recession. So I created another business. I find that I create businesses to solve problems. When I see a problem, I see a business. When I see a problem, I see a business. And I created a tourism company that takes people to Zimbabwe. These are three of my friends. Lena is based in Auckland. Angela is based in Timaru. And Raywin is based in Tauranga. And I said to them, I want to create a tourism business that takes people to Zimbabwe for 15 days. It's called Walk on the Wild Side Tours. And it is literally a walk on the wild side, because you get to spend the first 10 days in a community that lives on 30 US cents a month. What that means is there's no electricity, there's no running water. You live like a Zimbabwean eating the local food. We then do the last 5 days in the Victoria Falls, which is all 5-star. But the reason why we go is that each individual person is challenged to raise $10,000 to come on this trip. It is a life-changing trip. I show these ladies how to do that by creating an Africa-inspired dinner. So I show up as a gourmet chef. My mother used to have a restaurant, so I know how to cook for people in mass. And they each sold 100 tickets in every single city that they were in at $100 each. $10,000 was created in a heartbeat. $5,000 covers their flight, accommodation, their food, and their transport, and the safari at the end of the trip, and $5,000 goes to the foundation. This year, when we started in 2010, we raised $55,000 between the four of us. And we took over the primary school where my husband went to school. So the Zimbabwean government has not touched the rural schools in the last 25 years. School buildings are collapsing on the kids. There's no infrastructure, there's no pens, pencils, there's nothing. And by the time we got to the community, we sent the money for the community to make the bricks, the roof tiles, the window panes. The whole community got involved in the rebuilding of the school. Because what I found is when I sent supplies to the school, within 2-3 days somebody breaks into the school and steals everything. It's a very poor community. So to try and enroll the school into the vision that I had to create an incentive, a financial incentive. So we give people $50 US microloans. With $50 US, you can buy 5 bags of cement. You can make 1,000 bricks, and we train you how to do it. That you supply the school. We buy the bricks at $250 US, but you pay back the microloan.
I don't believe in giving people handouts. I believe in giving somebody a handout, but not a handout. I then train people on how to use the $200 effectively. They take $50, they go and buy another 5 bags of cement and supply more bricks next month. They put $50 into a savings account. Then they have $100 to use for the family. Now you remember, this is somebody who was living on 30 cents a month. They have $100, they're a millionaire. I've trained the women in my community how to cut and make the school uniforms for the school. So instead of going to a wholesaler to buy uniforms for the school children, the women in the community are making the school uniforms for us. Yes, so it's now a project that is uplifting an entire community, and they have ownership for it. One of the things I discovered when I left Africa is that we have the solutions to all of our problems. But we've been waiting for help to come from God knows where, and help is not coming. When I went back this time, all the window panes in the school were smashed. And I run mastermind sessions. I train people to think and come up with creative ideas. And I put electricity in the school and realized that now I had a bill to pay from New Zealand for electricity in Zimbabwe. So I got the community together and we brainstormed ideas on how we could raise money for the electricity bill. Now they have no money. Zimbabwe is a country that has no physical cash. Unless you're in the city, the Zimbabwean dollar was scrapped about 8 years ago. So US dollar is what's circulating, but you can only find it in the cities. So one day we brainstormed ideas on how to pay the electricity bill. And the community came around, and one of my aunts, she had 7 children who died of AIDS. She has 15 grandchildren in the school, and she is 92. She put up her hand and came up with a brilliant idea. She said to me, Getrude, why don't you buy a grinding mill that belongs to the school? Because we eat cornmeal instead of rice. And the nearest grinding mill is 10 kilometers away. The whole community go 10 kilometers away to pay their money there to get the corn ground. It cost me $500 to buy the school a grinding mill. Now the whole community come to the school to get their corn ground, and that money pays for the electricity bill.
Do they spray that corn again?
No. The good thing about Zimbabwe is we do not have pesticides, we do not have GM products. That is one of the best things, and you know, I did not know the meaning of the word organic until I left Africa, because all our food is organic. The meat, everything is organic. So that's one of the biggest things that I'm working on right now, to create product that we can export, organic fruit, vegetables that can be exported around the world. So by the time we got there, the school community had refurbished the school, and we were just ready to paint. So these are some of the children at the orphanage that I support, that has 280 kids who are HIV positive and have physical and mental disabilities as well. And what is sad about this orphanage is that people give them up for dead. I had to raise money last year for wheelchairs. This little baby died 2 weeks after I got back. And I have kept this picture for 9 years because she reminds me to keep going. I can't stop. There's so many kids that need help. And she had a condition called FTT, which is failure to thrive. So you can feed the AIDS babies, but they can't hold on to the nutrition. So this is when we end the trip in the Victoria Falls. I found this pride of lions that have been reared in captivity. And you go for a walk in the bush with 15 live-grown lions. It is the most life-changing thing I've ever done. I've had the courage to do it once. I will never do it again. And there's a protocol on how to walk with the lions as well. You walk behind them, not in front. If they crouch down, you can touch them, you can pet them so long as you're behind them. The minute they get up, you've got to get up, otherwise you're lunch. People who are 1.4 meters tall cannot do the walk because lions do sense vulnerability in small adults, so you have to be a certain height. So that's one of the things that we do on this trip. One of the things I realized about Zimbabwe is that it is one of those few places in the world where you can get so close to nature, like nowhere else in the world. You know, you do the elephant rides. When you go on a safari at day and at night, it's a completely different experience. You go bungee jumping off the Victoria Falls Bridge. I've done it 3 times. It is the most magical thing to do, just to jump off a bridge with water at the bottom. It's one of the biggest waterfalls in the world. And then we end the trip teaching you traditional African dancing, and you get your tribal markings and you become part of our tribe. So that's the way I'm funding the project for the children right now. It's through this little tourism company. And that's my baby brother. I was 8 years old when he was born. And I remembered my mom putting him on my back and I would care for him, you know. And this is him 2 weeks before he died. By the time I got to Zimbabwe, he was a skeleton. He was just skin and bones. And he gave up the will to live. But he gave me the gift. So I could help a lot of the other young Zimbabweans to get through this virus until we find a cure. Because if your mindset is right, you can survive any disease. So when I had this vision that I'm winning these 8 Oscars, I created this. This was done 10 years ago. 2015 was supposed to be the year that I finished the movie, but I had to shoot it out now to 2017 because I need the funding. But I started picking the actors who were taking part in this film. Big blockbuster movie stars were going to act for free as an act of charity. Now I'm writing the script, directing, producing, and acting in this film. So guess who I picked to be my husband in the film? Famous American actor. Who would you pick if you were me? Will Smith? Not quite. Who else? Just throw a few names around.
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman? Who else? A famous, damn good-looking African-American actor. Denzel, yes! So what I did is I had him on a vision board in my office for the last 10 years. And he's acting in my movie as my husband.
Whoa.
About 18 months ago, my oldest son is in film school. He gets picked to act in a movie pilot in Wellington. Guess who the director was? Denzel comes to Wellington, New Zealand and picks my son to act in this film. So I told the casting director to tell him that I knew him and I needed to meet him. And I met him when I was 19. There was a movie called Cry Freedom. I don't know if anybody ever watched Cry Freedom. It was about apartheid. And because of apartheid, they couldn't film in South Africa, so they filmed it in Zimbabwe. And I had this walk-on, walk-off part in this film, met him before he was famous, and he would talk to me every single day for the 3 weeks we were on set. Now you fast-track 25 years later, he shows up again in Wellington and picks my son. And I knew it wasn't a coincidence. So they told him that there's a crazy little African woman outside who says she knows you. And he came out to meet me and he said to me, "What the hell are you doing in New Zealand?" I get to hang out with Denzel for 3 weeks while he's filming in Wellington. And I said, "Denzel, this is my vision. If you say yes to acting in this film, all my other actors will say yes." He just hugged me and said, "Getrude, if I have the time, I'll do it." So I wrote the Oscar acceptance speech that day. I know it by heart. Now I just have to get off my butt and finish writing this damn script. So I really thank you guys for coming and for listening to my story. I'll be running these workshops to teach other people, like I was saying earlier, to write their own books. Because I think we change the world through our stories and through our books, and we inspire other people through our writing. I've come with a few examples of people that I've helped in the last few years. This lady is now 87. She is the principal at the school where my kids went to school when I first arrived in New Zealand. And she wrote this beautiful story of her life. I'm calling these legacy books because I encourage people to look for old photographs and tell the stories around the photographs. We also developed a DVD that goes with the book, so it's something memorable for the whole family to invest in. This is an author who I was hoping would show up, but she's based here in Rotorua, and she's written 2 books with my help. And this lady was 74 when I met her last year, and she wrote an amazing story about domestic violence and domestic abuse. And I normally interview the authors before they start writing, and I ask them, what difference do you want your book to make in the world? What will you write about? And she wrote a little story of how her husband punched her in the stomach when she was 6 months pregnant with her second child. That was the day that she decided to leave him. She is now 75. She published last year, and her whole life has changed because she's now an inspirational speaker. She gets hired to speak in women's refuge groups all over Australia. last week she called me and said, Getrude, somebody's asked me to ghostwrite a book for them. So she's now writing for other people as well, and she's 75. So I'm really inspired. This lady comes from Australia as well. She wrote this book called Tick when she got divorced at the age of 57. And she moved to China to teach English for a year. She has been there 10 years, has 10 English schools, and sponsors little girls whose parents have dumped them because of the one-child policy. So you call the book Tick, this is China. And the first book is all about the culture shock that she experienced when she moved to China. And in China, they say tick. If something goes wrong, it's like a catchphrase. Like in Africa, we say, welcome to Africa when things go wrong. But it's an amazing story. She then wrote a sequel to it called Mad, which is Making a Difference. And this talks about all of her philanthropic work around little girls in China and how she sponsors all these orphanages where little girls are. So I've had real fun, working with other people and helping them birth their stories. And I call myself the book midwife, because I show up at the right time when somebody's ready to push that baby out, and the delivery will be smooth and fun and effortless, because anyone can write a book. If you have a story, you should leave it with the world. The world is full of graveyards with amazing people who didn't have the courage to tell their stories. So please spread the word. Tell people that I'm running the workshop tomorrow.
Have you got a card and a
I do,
website
yes.
that I can check out? Because I have to go, but I would like to get one.
And on the website, there is a link with all of the information about the workshop. If you could share that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for stopping by.